right, so you're vibing out over there. I like that.
That's kind of trippy. I like that.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to have that effect on people. Welcome to Texans Unfiltered. I'm your host, YoungAriGold, aka James, or it could be James, aka YoungAriGold, whatever it would be. Luckily today, joined by Seth Payne, it is my favorite morning show, hands down. It is my favorite. And there are some that are here, we could talk off air about the other guys, but you and Sean have this crazy dynamic that I just think is so great. So not to skip your intro, but I don't know if it's necessarily needed anyways.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, if you guys don't know me, I'm Seth Payne. I played for the first 5 years of the Texans' existence, and I played 10 years in the NFL. And now I've been a radio host longer than I was an NFL player. So that's my official job now.
And you have an amazing radio show that's turned into this. Did you honestly think when you got into radio that it was you know what, I'm going to be one, in the primetime slot. 2, I'm going to have a really good dynamic with my co-host. And 3, I'm going to do this for a long time.
Okay. Those are good questions because I don't know if I had answers or even thoughts about any of those. I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And it's funny when you think about doing it for a long time. I can remember really well, within the first couple of weeks that I had taken the full-time job with Mike Meltzer when we were doing the middays. It was the New Orleans Super Bowl. And I remember walking around New Orleans kind of wondering oh crap, what did I get myself into? I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Radio Row.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, because
totally different.
The thing I was always worried about was I always had this vision of everybody being like Charlie Palillo. They must all have this brain. They can pull up facts and figures all the time.
Smart.
So I'm at the Radio Row and they're throwing people down in front of you to interview. And it was just it was very overwhelming. So I didn't necessarily have expectations. I knew I had enjoyed doing it, and enough people had told me that I had a skill for talking. As far as finding a co-host, and because I was really lucky to be with Mike for a long time, and I think he and I complemented each other well. And then being with Sean, we complement each other very well in a lot of ways. But I just had no clue about anything. I didn't know, I just kind of jumped into it.
Yeah.
And tried to do what they told me to do. So it's been a journey of discovery. It's been fun.
Yeah. And in a moment of vulnerability here, I'm just going to ask you straight up. So, NFL athlete, when you entered that, was there an imposter syndrome? Can I do this? Am I going to be good at this? Is this, because a lot, we see athletes on the field.
Yeah.
But we don't really get to see this type of athlete where you can have that kind of conversation.
So it's a really good question because for one, it's weird. It's less weird now for people because I think people podcast more and they're always streaming and they're talking into Zoom. But the thought of having a conversation with somebody or doing a solo show back then, for me, the thought of doing that was it's such a strange and artificial thing to do. So that part of it was just strange and kind of surreal. The imposter syndrome part, I think there was always I think maybe myself more so than most athletes who get into media I was aware of the existence of a jockocracy and the fact that really talented the media personalities kind of get screwed over in favor of athletes moving in. So I always felt all right, I don't want to be somebody. I'd never want to be somebody that's saying, well, you don't know because you didn't play the game. Because okay, my job is to use words to explain what it's like to play the game, not just to say oh yeah, you don't know because you didn't play the game. So I've always kind of felt I felt a responsibility with that early on, and I think I just over time I worked really hard at learning how to talk about basketball and baseball on the radio to the point where I almost got too nerdy about it, and then I realized oh no, it should be more, especially in basketball. You could break down defense in basketball. Very few people actually want that. You just the drama and the individual battles are way more interesting. So it's simplifying it over time actually got easier.
Well, and it's funny because now Astros talk, it's almost that's become second nature to you, which I would assume the success of the Astros probably play a part, but at the end of the day, you weren't a baseball player, but now you're pretty damn good at speaking baseball.
Well, you know what it is you get this emotional attachment to the players. And I think that more than anything, because I was never really a baseball fan until the Texans took me in the expansion draft in 2002. That was the first time I'd ever lived in a baseball city. So I started going to baseball games and, getting to see these guys and understanding the stress that you feel when a guy is at the plate, like the excitement you feel when a guy makes a play in the field. So that part of it has been fun, just because that, you don't get that in football. Like I used to think it was kind of a stupid point about how in football you don't see the guys' faces, so you don't form as much of a connection. But man, I totally get it. In baseball, it's all right there. You see the guy, like, oh, that's a human being. And like Altuve, you watch Altuve year after year after year. My wife feels like if anything ever happened to Altuve, I would have to take my wife to a psychologist for at least a year, for grief counseling, if he left or anything, because she's so emotionally attached to him.
No, that's amazing. What made you stick to Houston after? Coming from Jacksonville, playing here 5 years, what you were just like, you know what, Houston's just great, or we're comfortable, or kids are in school, so therefore going to have to, or
there were a couple things. I'd kind of bounced around. We had a house in Jacksonville still. I lived right next door to Tom Coughlin, which I didn't know until I moved into the house.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, the realtor told me that Tom Coughlin, my old coach, lived in the neighborhood. So I moved in. The first day I'm moving in, Judy Coughlin, his wife, who's awesome, but still was I didn't know that at the time. She walks up and she was like, "We're right next door." I'm like, "Oh, Coughlin's gonna be yelling at me all the time." But we had a house there that we still had from when I was playing. And we kind of we realized we wanted to be closer to family. So we moved up to upstate New York and lived in my wife's hometown. We're from pretty close to each other, but that's up in the middle of nowhere. So after about a couple of years of living up there, we realized, all right, we might want to be around civilization more than we need to be around family right now.
Sure.
And John Granado every now and then would call me. And I think by then he was at 1560. They had moved to 1560. So Granado would call me every now and then to get my opinion on something. And Granado kind of encouraged me to get into it. And I was getting antsy and kind of stir crazy up in the sticks. So I just came down it was in the spring, I think. And I went around and I did a spot on air with each of the 3 stations at the time. And just kind of decided to go for it and moved back down to Houston and did some Texans radio in 2012 and just got offered the full-time job in January 2013.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. It's funny how the dynamic of the circle in Houston radio goes. John, Lance, John Harris, Sean, Mike, it's everybody is associated with somebody in some form or fashion. There's definitely a link.
It's we were talking about that this morning too, about how there was this mass diaspora of Houston athletes that all left over the last few years, and now all of a sudden Harden wants to come back, and DeMeco wanted to come back here. That part was what was so cool about DeMeco wanting to come back here. I feel like if everything works out really well, that'll have to be part of the story when they overly dramatize it, is that we were all suffering and all these athletes had just decided to leave, whether it's Springer or Correa or Harden or whoever else I'm missing right now. Yeah, DeAndre. but they're like, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden you've got DeMeco who comes back and says no, this is where I want to be. I don't want to be anywhere else. This is where I want to be. That part was, I got really excited when I heard that part of the story.
I think for me, as a fan, looking at it from just that perspective alone, to feel wanted, which sounds so strange to say as a fan, right? Because normally that's not something you ever really actually feel. You only feel that in your human life. But to feel wanted after the 2 years technically the 3 years this team has really been through by the top head coaching candidate, let alone him also be the former captain and drafted player, it was oh shit, this can only be cool.
Yeah. That's I mean, he was the sought after candidate, which obviously I try to maintain as level headed as possible. I really love DeMeco Ryans.
You love him.
Yeah. I just he was so impressive to me when I was in my 10th year in the NFL when he was a rookie. And I know you've probably heard me tell this story before, but the first day he was calling plays in the huddle, he was kind of having trouble spitting the words out. And I was like a grumpy old veteran, and it was probably 107 degrees. And I kind of tore into him, and he just kind of looked at me and like didn't freak out or anything. He just kind of calmed me down. Like as I'm like trying to chide him, he just kind of like calmed me down. And he just has that persona. And I think that sometimes I worry about when I describe him that people are going to think that he's some kind of dormouse or something. So I highly encourage everybody, if you haven't, because you don't really think of DeMeco as a football player, especially if you're younger or something, go watch some DeMeco Ryans highlights. Like he was
not a dormouse.
Yeah, no, yeah, like he was like that Ronnie Lott type of guy that like he was a perfect gentleman off the field, but like on the field was just a missile. And it was like the perfect blend of everything you want in a football player.
So be honest here. Did you know it was happening and you just couldn't say anything before it was actually announced? Like you don't have to say who or what or where it came from, but there's like a moment where you said, okay, this is going to happen?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when it was. I had a little bit of advance warning, and I knew I was on the right track because I had reason to believe that the lawsuit wasn't going to be an issue. And that was like the biggest. So he had sued the team while he was a player. And so like I had.
And what was that actually about? What was it? Was it just like a turf thing or?
Yeah, it was unsafe playing conditions. I think that was because when he came back and he was with the Eagles, he tore his Achilles tendon on the field. So, and I don't even remember how it all worked out. I think there might have been a settlement or something. But like I had reason to believe that wasn't going to be an issue. But then there was still like so many questions about exactly how he was going to feel about the organization. There was that report that he wasn't interested. There was all like there was just so much smoke that you just never know. And like I've got enough bad stock tips in my time that I know like not to believe something just because I'm hearing stuff on the inside. So I really wasn't sure until just probably a couple days before. But it was I think that's another thing too that we'll probably forget over time. Was that the Texans were just getting dragged through the mud, being labeled as an organization that, you know, had fired three head coaches in 3 years or 4 in 4 years because they wanted to lump Lovey. They wanted to lump an interim coach into there too. And that all that part of it made sense. But I think the biggest thing that people won't remember, because I know they don't remember it about the Astros, is like how miserable it is while you're trying to reset that, because you have no reason to trust or believe in the people doing the resetting. Because there was no reason to really believe in Luno at the time until they pulled it off. And likewise, I think that's the ugly part of it. Like if we were to go into this season and just try to suck again, Caserio wouldn't have his job at the end of the year. There'd be so much drama and it would be a mess.
Speaking of Caserio, so like my favorite segments are hands down when you guys talk to Nick, from the entrance to the ending, no matter how it goes. Like it's the only time that I get to hear Nick Caserio be humanized. And it's the only time that we can really get a sense of like who the person is. Every other time it's this typical, general manager stuff. And I think you guys do an amazing job with that. Like, what is it that because I think you struggled actually the first time you interviewed him to really get like some form of relationship going. And then out of nowhere, it's like, it just worked. Like, how do you he's so analytical. So he's just different.
Yeah. That's, it's a good question. I'm actually glad you're asking that question, because sometimes you don't consciously think about it as much as you should to try to form that relationship. I think early on we realized like, okay, look, there's parts of Nick that come from the New England school where you get and I don't think he's ever trying to be like Bill Belichick, but I think there's kind of a close, keeping things tight to your vest part of it. But also that, he's as a GM, it's a weird position because those guys, a lot of times their first time really dealing a lot with the media is when all of a sudden they're the head of a football team. And Nick had dealt with the media in New England, so that wasn't as much of an issue. But I think we decided that these first couple times that we have an interview will be, very careful. We want to try to form a long-term relationship, and we'll take it on the chin in terms of being accused of asking softball questions because we did. So you go into it and like, listen, I'm not going to check Twitter for at least like 3 hours after the show. Because,
leave Lamont alone. Just let Lamont get it all off.
Or anybody. Well, realistically, it's true though. It's true. Like fans want the hard questions to be asked, and that's what they deserve. Like they deserve to at least have that question asked of a GM. So we kind of thought like, all right, we just gotta be sure that we're respectful and not pushovers or anything, but we want to develop a relationship to where he feels like he can trust us. Almost like you're taming a timid wild animal. So a lot of it was, and a lot of it too early on was just like reading as much as I could to try to figure out what really interested him and the way he thought. So I I went back and found the books from the videos from the Sloan conference, the stats conference, and various interviews he had done. He's mentioned in a couple different books about the Patriots and articles about the Patriots. So I'll try to find some common ground that way. The only hazard in that is that a lot of times there's inaccuracies in those things, in those articles that are written about people. So you have to be really careful when you're like, so you've said before that you hate short people, like, and then it was just so like over the course of it, we started to just be able to figure out, how to loosen him up and get him to laugh. And Sean realized or figured out that he was into wrestling. And so that was big for those two. And so I think after a couple times we got to the point where we felt like, okay, I can ask him hard questions. Sometimes, you're not like, when you're not going to get an answer out of him, but you want to ask the question and maybe you can shed some light on it a certain way. But he's got a good tactic though too, where when you ask him a question that he really doesn't want to answer, he just goes a long time. Like he talks a long time.
Word salad.
Yeah. So then you're thinking, well, we've got a half hour with him, and you're like doing the time budgeting. Like, man, he's gonna filibuster if I ask him this, but I gotta ask him this. So you try to ask some angle to it. So yeah, it's interesting. I think he's enjoyed kind of learning how to loosen up a little bit too with guys that aren't necessarily. Look, we're not tearing into him. Obviously, we're a pretty friendly environment.
Well, I think ultimately it sounds weird to say, but it's almost like a safe space for him to be able to just actually call in and have a conversation and it not be really anything else, right? Because at the presser, 32 reporters all searching. I mean, and no disrespect to the reporters, but it's their job, all searching for the click. They and that's their revenue. That's how it's generated. So it makes sense. That's their living. But and so he knows to be cautious when speaking. The interesting part about Caserio for me is the way he looks, like the talks of like, and this is probably so boring to everybody else, but I love the Silicon Valley talks. I love the stock talks. It really gives me a peek into his mind. It lets me know how he views things. So I knew he wouldn't come out with all 12 picks because he was going to look at certain stock prices, which he would then be, draft capital, and he would trade it to grab whatever it may be. But he's just such an intricate, person when it comes to the way he thinks, and I wish we got more of that.
Yeah, it's hard too because I think there's always still. I think that he doesn't want to necessarily give anybody insight into exactly the way he thinks. So he'll have fun with my wannabe stat nerdiness and everything. But I think there is part where he'll let us in on a little something they discovered in a study that at a certain position height doesn't matter nearly as much as they used to think it did. So then immediately you're wondering all right, quarterback, defensive line, offensive line, what is it? Right. Then you go back but he's not going to give you everything, obviously, because then some other team might realize that his evaluation is a certain way. The thing that I was talking to my wife about this morning. The thing that I've learned to really like about him are some of the things that he says continually over time. When he talks kind of philosophically about things, or what he likes going out, like how he likes going about his business, you'll hear him say, and that's okay. Like in talking about negotiations, or if somebody's coming from something from a different viewpoint or something, I think that's really his worldview in negotiating or in any kind of human relationship. you're going to have two people that are coming at it from at least slightly different perspectives. And you got to learn. And this is like the human side of him that I don't think he gets credit for. It's kind of like the robotic side, but that works really well for him as a human. Like in dealing with Deshaun Watson, like, okay, there's going to be certain things and they've got different expectations about what a contract is than I do and everything else. But like, you got to be able to separate some of those extraneous things or those differences and just try to focus in like a laser on on the common interests. And like, I think he's like, that's a very hard human thing to do that I think he's actually really good at.
I agree 100%. Like, I think the Deshaun situation, even outside of the draft capital that was received just from before the trade, just the way everything was handled, honestly, and I told Sean this too, like, I don't know if another GM would have been able to handle everything that came with Deshaun at that time.
I would have dumped him for like a second.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
I would have a stomach ache in the corner every night. Like, what? This isn't going to end well. This isn't going to end well. I was like,
right. You get a second and then they trade him for 3 firsts because
yeah.
You're like, oh.
There was at one point where I was like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm a freaking radio host. I got to talk about it for 4 hours a day. Yeah. Like, just get rid of him. I don't care.
Imagine being the guy that started like a protest about him before everything came out, and then like having to live with that for like the rest of your life. Like, and it's always like, it's literally like, as soon as I piss somebody off on Twitter, it's like, oh yeah, are you this guy? And it's like, oh yeah, that's me.
That's where I can't like ever. I've actually done a lot of work on myself over like the last 10 years, man. And like I used to be like, speaking of Lamont, like Lamont used to accuse me of being fake angry all the time. Like it was just like, no, dude, I was actually like a super angry person. But there's a part of me that like I never want to actually talk about it too much because I know somebody's going to shoot the video of me and Josh Innes out there. Like,
exactly. It's just going to come out. It's like, oh yeah, Seth Payne from 6'10" or Seth Payne from Josh Innes.
Real placid there, fella.
Okay,
so you but that's, you know, I mean, that was understandable though. We had, you had no reason to believe he was gonna have 24 counts of allegations.
I knew ahead of time. I just was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna stand by this guy who has all these allegations.
Oh, that was okay. When did you do that?
I'm just kidding. I would not have ever done that. Like, it was just like, you know what I felt like at that time, and nobody's ever like really asked. They just want to poke fun, which I don't really give a shit. Like, it's the internet, but it was just like we were shitted on for so long.
Yeah.
Prior to that, and it was like the only hope I felt for the franchise at the time was that Deshaun Watson was on our team, and quarterbacks run the league. So I was like, I could sit here and complain, or I can try to do something, and maybe I won't do anything. But you know what? At the end of the day, I did more than just type something.
Yeah.
And, you know, the day was the worst day to do it, but everybody was off, and I totally get it. And Brandon Scott already let me know ahead of time. But, like, it is what it is. Like, what are you going to do? You know, we all make mistakes. Fuck it.
That's what I know. Well, look, none of it makes sense. Like, you've probably heard me say this before. Like every now and then we got to admit to ourselves, like, anything involved in sports is complete, like, irrational nonsense. None of it makes sense, but like it's whatever we need as humans to keep our sanity. We got to attach ourselves to something when we don't have an actual army to fight or a battle to wage or something. We got to have something.
Exactly. And I'm an idea guy. So like, and I'll be the first to admit it. Like, I have a million ideas. I'm ADD like crazy. So like the ideas are just like flowing like the Matrix. And 1 out of 100 are probably good, but I tend to always settle for 99 or 98, right?
Yeah.
And that happened to be 98, and it's like, it's okay. But like, that's just what happens when you have so many ideas. You're going to act on them. You're going to hit on some. You're going to miss on some. It kind of is what it is.
That's interesting though too, because if you are like that, you can't sit and contemplate all those different choices. At some point, you just got to be in the habit of just taking action, right?
Decisive. Like, I have to decide, I'm going to go this route.
That's actually good. That's good advice for those of us who are attentionally challenged.
Yeah.
I'm going to write that down.
Nick Caserio, how can he, and this will be the last question about Nick, what do you think he could do to like kind of get out of that New England shadow, right? I mean, look, it doesn't matter. Ball boy came from New England. He's trying to be Belichick. Like, it doesn't matter who you pull from New England. You're Belichick. Can he kind of shed that or no?
That's interesting. I think that I mean, obviously, team success would be a huge thing. I mean, I think there would be the perception if it goes really well here for the Texans in the next few years. I think I think Nick will actually get like all the credit he deserves. When people look back on it in hindsight, they're going to look exactly at the situation he stepped into. I mean, his hiring was the very thing that apparently triggered the Deshaun going through with the trade request, and then how bizarre the turn of events were after that. But if he can turn this around and build a championship caliber team, there's no part of this experience where they're going to be able to say, oh, okay, well, he just stepped into something and it was ready made for him. So I guess if anything, the argument I would start making is like, hey, we need to re-examine Belichick and see how much of it was actually Nick Caserio, which would be, there's a lot. I mean, I don't like to get into those arguments too much about like Belichick versus Brady or anything. Like it always takes multiple parts to do anything, but you do wonder if, over time, I wish Belichick were a younger man, so it'd be easier to kind of do the comparison thing. But I think he'll get credit as long as the team does well.
I think ultimately we're seeing that he's building this roster a lot differently than what we've seen from the Patriots in the past, right? When would you have ever seen Bill Belichick trade up to grab Will Anderson?
Yeah.
Like those are the types of things where like the risk adversity the New England Patriots have always kind of they've always been risk adverse. It's very much standard process, right?
Yeah.
And Nick's kind of come in and swung a little bit here and there. Swung huge with holding on to Deshaun when everybody told him to trade him when the offer from Miami was 2-1s and getting more back once the settlement happened. And then you look at then there's other parts where he's very much like Bill, where it's trade for Shaq Mason, 7th round pick, no big deal. If we don't extend him, we get a good year, it's okay. Like all these little moves, Marcus Cannon, come on over, like we'll give you this. Those are all very Belichick style moves. Or were they Caserio style moves?
Right, yeah, because the Patriots went hog wild in free agency after Caserio was out of there. So it made some like pretty aggressive. I hate to say overspend in free agency because they're all overspends. Like Meltzer taught me this. If when you get a free agent, usually you were the highest bidder. Like that wasn't whatever, it wasn't the average of all prices. You were the highest bidder. And that's one of the dangers of free agency. But that's a good point. I think that if the biggest thing that I think people assume about him that I don't believe, and it's not like we're best buds or anything, but I don't think that he has to have this like complete and total control and power over DeMeco. I think that with anybody, there would be probably, at first, a want or desire to be sure that you're in control of things. I could see those two over time really developing like kind of a Baltimore Ravens style of relationship where I think Ozzie Newsome and Harbaugh had a very good, just natural symbiotic relationship. I think the majority of times there is like an alpha between the two of them, between the GM and the head coach. But I do think that there are times where guys just work well together. And I hope that's what these guys, like, that's what I felt from the very beginning. That thing I said about Nick and how he's able to just separate all the nonsense from the core issue. Like that's DeMeco. Like DeMeco, that's why so many guys can relate to him. He is not hung up on any kind of macho BS, weird head games that you learned from your junior high coach in 1964 or anything like that. Like he just wants to help guys get better. And like they're different personalities, but I think they're that right there, like the fact that they are very much focused on getting everybody going in the same direction, like that could end up being a really good thing.
Yeah. All right. So moving to the draft. One of my favorite things about when I listen to you guys is you're very open to saying, you know what, like you'll switch your opinion, and it's not even like a big deal to you. You're like, you know what, maybe if we're gonna take like for instance, I think it was a week before the draft. It was if we're gonna take a quarterback, swing. And take Anthony Richardson.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been my thought the entire time going into it. It's like, you had the whole take a crowd. We talked about this before. Take a quarterback because you have to not taking a quarterback because you don't love him. What do you think CJ Stroud as a draft prospect, and like obviously the S2 stuff, I think it's blown out of proportion a little bit. But when you hear him speak, I don't know. I'm one of those people that I tend to judge how you talk, but maybe that's just because I'm good at talking.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are your thoughts on CJ?
I think that the accuracy is a real thing. Like specifically the ball placement. I think that probably really appealed to Bobby Slowick and Nick Caserio, just because run after the catch is such a big deal with those successful, Kubiak offenses.
Yeah.
For those people that don't know, I call it the Kubiak Shanahan. I got tired of saying the Kubiak Shanahan system.
Have you copyrighted it?
Yeah. And, oh no, somebody got the website, I think. Already.
You should start a shirt that is only sold on 610, and then have like shadows of little Shanahan and Kubiak, like in the back. I don't know.
I know something a little.
See, 99 out of the 100 ideas just came out. You're welcome.
The fact, yeah, your t-shirt company would probably be a good. If you got that many ideas, a t-shirt company is definitely these days the thing to do. I think that I do like advantages over Bryce Young. Obviously, the height, whatever.
Yeah.
The height, whatever. But like he can drive it to the sidelines better on some of these like 15-yard out routes. I think. And they knocked Deshaun for supposedly not being able to do that, and he's just fine because he's got such good anticipation and timing. But I think that the biggest concern I had, likewise, was at first I was worried. I was nervous about his personality, just because the interviews that I had watched or the press conferences I had watched, I just never felt like he really looked like he had that kind of quarterback charisma. Like even to the level of an Eli Manning or something.
Yeah.
And then I watched the interview on the Pivot that Ryan Clark and Fred Taylor and Channing Fryer do, whatever his name is. And like I was very impressed with that. And then some Ohio State people, like various Ohio State people over the last couple months, have like tweeted me stuff and DM'd me stuff, like various times where CJ has shown his personality. A lot of times it's like when he's interacting with Bryce Young, ironically enough. And like I think he's a very guarded person, and probably partly due to his upbringing and everything that happened to him. I think Nick has alluded to this. And I've heard other people talk about it, so I don't know. Like this is all speculation on my part.
Sure.
I think they might with CJ. I could see it being a situation where they're like, okay, sometimes he doesn't quite believe or want to buy into what the coach is saying immediately. And is that like, what is the reason for that? Is it because of a skepticism? Is it because he really just wants to know and understand it? Or is it because there's trust issues? I don't know. These are all just various things that people have speculated. So I think the question then is like, okay, like how do we go about addressing these issues, if they are issues at all? But like, how do we go about addressing these issues and actually have good, fruitful conversation? Because I feel like I've played with a lot of guys in the NFL that, did like just sometimes just not trust people. And it's hard. I was talking to Jonathan Joseph about a defensive back that played for the Texans who just flat out didn't trust anybody. And the kid was, I'm not going to tell you who it was, but the kid was really talented, but like he did not want to accept advice from Jonathan because he didn't trust him, didn't want to accept advice from Kareem because he didn't trust him. Like it was just for whatever reason, because of his upbringing, that was the way he was. So like you've got to have a plan for overcoming that. Now that was an extreme example, and I don't think that's anything at all like CJ or any successful college quarterback is. So I like whatever smoke there was about him being hard to coach. If there's any truth to it, I think that Ryan Day and Nick Caserio and Bobby Slowick and who am I missing here? Yeah. Oh, Gerard especially. Yeah, Gerard.
I think him more than anything.
Boy, yeah. I'm glad you brought up Gerard. Because Gerard's got that personality of kind of a
exactly.
Yeah.
He's the piece.
Yeah. So and like I hate to talk about it like it's a real thing without knowing exactly what it is, but whatever smoke there was about all that, I think you're right. Gerard might really be a big factor in that.
Yeah, when I think of the quarterback room now with Gerard Johnson, just based on like living in Houston for so long before I moved to Austin, like always hearing Lopez, Gerard would always call up. So like you could hear, like you would always hear Gerard on the radio if you happen to listen to Lopez, and just hearing that guy talk, and then now watching interviews of the past or anything that he's done at like the Elite 11 or whatever. He's the type of guy you want your quarterback to be around. There's really no doubt about it from a personal perspective, the character that Gerard Johnson is. And so when you bring that in, and then when you add the stuff that Nick said on Friday with you guys, I think ultimately CJ is CJ. And I think that's okay.
Yeah.
But when you're different, you are viewed as such in a league where different isn't normally accepted.
Right. Yeah. Like, yeah, in the NFL, I mean, look at how long it took him to adopt some of the college concepts, because it was just like, no, we run an NFL offense. This is good. Part of that is because you used to be able to just try to murder the quarterback. So they had to do certain things to protect him. But I think that, I'm really glad you brought up Gerard, because it was something I had thought of a while ago that sets him apart from a lot of NFL coaches, which is because he spent time as a quarterback tutor, or like a private quarterback coach, and because he spent a lot of time with youth athletes, he simply just has more reps dealing with more personalities, and that is one of the things. You'd be amazed, like some position coaches in the NFL, like I swear they almost get worse over time, because they don't actually work with that many dudes, and they never really have to break things down to their fundamentals. So like guys that are more X's and O's types of guys, sometimes they really start to lag on the actual teaching of fundamentals and technique and everything. So where with Gerard Johnson, like he's had just a boatload of experience with different types of athletes, different kids, different personalities, kids that didn't even want to be there, but their parents were making them, and other kids that were like hyper competitive to their own detriment. So that might end up being really good. The Gerard might be a really big factor in all of this.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we had plans to talk about other stuff, but we're 40 minutes in, so therefore we're gonna pivot now, and we'll just talk about Will Anderson. That way you can get on with your day and go hang out with the kids and wife. Right, dinner starts shortly. But Will Anderson, how important is that character, that good guy, the genuine individual in on the defense or just in the locker room in general, right? We've seen it over the last 2 years since Nick's been here. We've really seen a true devotion to grabbing good veteran guys since day one. Yeah, it's always been about that. But now you have a young guy coming in who's touted as one of the better human beings in the world, which is amazing. I'm a big believer in character. How much of an impact can that really have on a locker room?
It's a really good question, and it's probably such a hard thing to quantify. I think that part of it is that, yes, it has a big effect on the locker room, especially if he has, the way I always try to look at it is you can handle a few guys, a few character issues on your team as long as they're not charismatic. Like it's once the charismatic guy is the character issue guy, then it's death, because he drags 8, 9, 10 guys down with him, so you got to be really careful when you bring a guy in. Like if whatever Jalen Carter's issues are, I feel like people weren't as worried about him, because I think he's more of a follower than and everybody says, agreed. Yeah, everybody says they want leaders, all leaders and everything. Like, it's okay to have some followers as long as they're following good dudes. So I think that part of it is important. But it's never that like one guy can change the culture. If one guy can change the culture a lot, if he's also a really, really good football player. I think on the football field, at least, like Ray Lewis, just, he held people to a high standard, and he created a certain kind of energy for that team, for that defense. So that part is important. I think the biggest thing, honestly, is that I think that when you're drafting in the first round these days, like the character and the confidence that a guy is motivated by more than just money is really, really big. Like, and there's parts like, or I would look at CJ Stroud, and I think if some people might think he has too much of an edge or something, there's a part of me that says I'd rather have that than Nick Foles can't stop getting up in front of people and telling them about how football doesn't really matter. 100%. You've probably heard me say this. I I want my quarterbacks and my head coaches to lack perspective in life. Like, I don't want them to be healthy mentally. I want them to be like so obsessed to a sick degree that they have to like dial it back and remember like, oh yeah, I got to be with my family too. And like, I think guys are better at doing that these days. So I think it does matter. It's just, it's really hard to identify. So with Will, I think the difference is that he kind of, in the same way that I talk about DeMeco, I think he almost kind of has this almost mythological reputation that's earned by playing at one of the toughest places and toughest coaches to play for in the league. One of the
toughest coaches.
Yeah. And so I think it's almost like the way I look at it, like I was talking to you before we came on. I don't particularly like the theory that it was a trade up for a quarterback in actuality. And I don't get it. Yeah. Okay. But I get it. Like at first I didn't understand it at all. And then I worked real hard. Like I
still don't understand it.
I think I quit.
But go ahead. Go ahead.
I compromised and figured like, okay, it's like a package, it's like or it does make sense if what you really, really wanted was Will Anderson, but you were going to roll the dice and try to get both. You still could have taken Will. I don't know. Anyway.
So it's like getting the sofa and the love seat instead of just buying the sofa.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could have gotten, but to get both of them, you had to take that gamble of taking Stroud first. But I guess the part that I don't like about that theory still is that it means that they had a quarterback that they thought was worth a third overall pick, but they valued him lower than a defensive end. And like just by positional value, like you got to take the quarterback. So, but that's where I can see both sides of it. So I try not to worry too much about it. But as far as like the actually taking of Will Anderson and whether he's worth it or not, I think part of it was just insurance. Like however you want to say, like you spent a lot for the package deal, if you want to call it a package deal. And I think it's the insurance of feeling like, all right, this guy is going to transfer to the NFL game as long as we use him a certain way, which I'm okay with. I was a little skeptical about him translating some of his game to the NFL, but I think I know what DeMeco wants to do with him. But B, just because he's such a solid dude and because I think they believe he's motivated by more than just money, that they feel really comfortable taking him up there.
Yeah, I think have you seen that Netflix doc? It's not the Dream Team, but it's the one with Kobe. What was that one? I forgot what it's called, but have you seen it on Netflix?
No.
Okay, well, first of all, you should watch it.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down too.
So basically, like the USA team has lost back to back, not been competitive whatsoever. Kobe Bryant and like Carmelo Anthony, LeBron James. Carmelo and LeBron are like 2 years in the league. They're super young guys. And they're all coming back from the club at like 4 a.m. And there's Kobe in the gym. He didn't go to the club with them. And he's already working out. And like Carmelo walked away like, oh shit, like maybe we need to like actually put in some work. And that next morning, all of them were there. And so it's like when I think of Will Anderson, I think of like doing the right thing, continuing to put the work in, especially on a young team. I think, and I've never been in the NFL, so it just becomes contagious in my opinion. Because once you see one guy, you see another guy. And when you see another guy, you see another guy. And then it just becomes this feeling and this expectation that this is how we're going to do things. Redeem team. That's it.
The Redeem Team. Okay. You know what? And actually, I'm really glad you brought that up because it's funny. I can remember when I was a player, you'd hear stories about some teams. And one was like the Ravens. The Ravens as a team, it almost sounded like your high school football team.
Yeah.
Like they would all like hang out together after games and have a big team party and everything. The Bills back in the day, they were like their 4 Super Bowl team. Like the stories I would hear about that, because I know a couple of guys that played on those teams. It was like that was the dying gasp of like the old school NFL, where like it was like a lot of the shit they did in the 70s was still going on, but also like they would party like crazy, but they would do it together. And like Jim Kelly would have the whole team over together afterwards, like after games in his basement for parties. And like you'd hear about teams like that just had this tight camaraderie. The Broncos, when Romanowski was kind of like the spiritual leader of that team.
Yeah.
And introduced them all to creatine. It was like,
needed.
Yeah. So like, yeah, there are those. It's less common in the NFL than it is in college, but having those guys, and I think especially, you heard Nick talk about how, like Will Anderson and Bryce Young decided to play in the bowl game, even though they didn't
Right.
need to. Like they helped keep that team together. I think if you can create that kind of environment, that's kind of rare.
Yeah, I think that 30 for 30 that they did with the Ravens was so good because it showed that they're still like, this was only like 6 months ago, but they're all still close. They all still hang out. Like they bonded over that aspect.
Oh, really?
Of that experience.
I haven't seen that one. Yeah, I remember there was a center, Quentin New Year, who was with that team when they just first started getting really good, and he told me a lot about it. It was really cool. You're kind of jealous. You're like, oh, I want to play in that NFL. That sounds like
some friends.
Yeah. Teams can get. It's not like basketball where I guess it's like super cliquish, but it can get kind of cliquish. Guys got their own group that they hang out with, and it's not always as Houston. One of Houston's issues as a football team, or like I think for anybody in the city, for any of these teams, is that guys do tend to be so spread out geographically.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of, and it makes sense that like in Buffalo especially, they all lived around Orchard Park,
right.
And it's easy to get places and everything. Green Bay, like it's easy for guys to hang out, and it's almost like it becomes the athletic dorms,
Yeah.
Like it's harder in Houston. You got guys in Sugar Land. There used to be more guys in Pearland. That's changed.
The Woodlands.
Yeah. Oh God. Does anybody live in the Woodlands?
I mean, not that I know of.
Okay,
but I would assume so.
There might be.
I mean, why wouldn't they?
Early on, it was. I remember like Steve McKinney lived down in Clear Lake, and it was hard to. It's hard to get everybody together. Yeah, you really have to work at it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes total sense. Well, cool. Well, Seth, I appreciate you. I'm sorry we didn't get to everything that we said we would get to. But I just want to say thank you for coming on. It was a great conversation. And we'll definitely have to have you on again at sometime in the future.
No, it's my pleasure, man. And I know that like you were worried at one point that I hated you on social media or something.
Yeah.
It was at times I pretty much just like I just disappear from social media, and it's out of a disgust for the entire platform more so than any one individual. So I've I a few years ago I really tried to start leaving petty arguments aside behind and everything. So no worries whatsoever.
Yeah. I never seem to worry if somebody like hates me or dislikes me. My biggest concern, and this is my ADHD again, is being misunderstood.
Yeah.
I really don't give a fuck if anybody likes me. It's more or less that like, did you understand what we were conversing about? And if not, like, did you get my point? Well, if you didn't get my point, like, I'd like to have that conversation so that you can at least walk away either understanding or educated. Like, that's the point of a conversation.
Oh, you know what? No, because I remember there was one time where we disagreed about something. And I think that, you were adding on to a point of mine, and I didn't understand it at first, but then you clarified it. But then I think I just left the conversation because, like, as a bad communicator, I was like, okay, go. I'm good. See ya. So you probably thought I was just, like, ditching you. So I
don't remember that one. But, I mean, even DMing you, you're like me. I have kids, a wife. I've been married 17 years. Like, Twitter's not going to be where I spend my free time. Sorry, it's just not.
Oh no, I felt bad. Yeah, you had followed up on a DM you had sent me, and I had the reply loaded in the phone, and it hadn't been sent. So no, my pleasure, man. Have me on again. I get lonely, like we've established. I get lonely. So
hey, you're more than welcome anytime. So thanks a lot, Seth.
I'm not. I gotta go do dishes. I'm not. I wish I were lonely right now.
I gotta go eat dinner. She's made spaghetti from scratch, so I'm like super excited. Like fresh noodles and everything.
Oh,
I'm
really?
like, oh yeah. Like, yeah, she
Good.
made the noodles, pressed them, rolled them. Like,
is she Italian?
No, she's Hispanic.
That's awesome.
So if I'm late, I won't be able to stream ever again because she runs my life.
All right, man. Go get your noodles.
All right.